Right, there's another fellow named Jeffrey who subscribed to my channel who's concerned about global warming and habitat, and some of his videos uh, talk about philosophy and politics as well. And I think there's some good points that he brings up. There's a book by James Hansen that he talks about that is I think crucial to starting the conversation, at least, of um, whether a runaway greenhouse effect is possible for this planet. It got me thinking about this concept and the debate between Lord Monckton and these people that show up on Sean Hannity and Glenn Beck, and they show up on these conservative denialist shows saying, that Al Gore is full of it, and that it's really a problem because they have a lot of people, ignorant people, believing that there's no trouble out there. That our Earth is in trouble. There's no question about it. And we need to, you look at my friend from India, Mumbai, says, that people in India just look the other way, and that they're just pouring pollution into the environment. Look at China's population, which they've gotten under control. It doesn't look like India has gotten their population under control. More population means more pollution. Some very serious things going on. And the United States must take a role in this, a leadership role. We're bowing out of Kyoto, and we're bowing out of Copenhagen. We're bowing out of places because of business reasons. It's pathetic. We have no chance. So yeah, and there's this concept that Jeffrey brings up about the runaway greenhouse effect, and I did some just looking as I usually do in Wikipedia. Nothing complex about this. A runaway greenhouse effect is a process in which a net positive feedback between surface temperature and atmospheric opacity, increases the strength of the greenhouse effect on a planet until its oceans boil away. That's a very scary deal, huh? An example of this is believed to have happened in nearby history, in the early history of Venus. On the Earth, the IPCC states that a runaway greenhouse effect analogous to Venus appears to have virtually no chance of being induced by anthropogenic activity. Other, less catastrophic events that nonetheless can produce a large climate change sometimes are loosely called a runaway greenhouse, although it's not an appropriate description. For example, it's been hypothesized that large releases of greenhouse gases may have occurred concurrently with the Permian-Triassic extinction event, the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. Other terms such as abrupt climate change or tipping points could be used when describing such scenarios. So this whole concept of a tipping point is the most scary. And when do we go beyond? And you have the Christian apologists, and you have the people that are against any kind of rationality here, talking about that Armageddon is inevitable. In my mind, that is an evil part of religion. That is awful, because it's saying there's nothing we can do, and God will take care of us, and Jesus will jump out of the clouds when catastrophe happens. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. This term was coined, this runaway greenhouse effect, coined by Andrew Ingersoll. Wonder if he's any relation to the great philosopher humanist Andrew Ingersoll of Caltech, in a paper that modeled the atmosphere of Venus. Water vapor initially in the atmosphere of Venus absorbed outgoing radiation, which caused the planet to heat and increased water vapor. High abundance of water vapor in the atmosphere allowed it to be photo-disassociated, with lighter hydrogen gas escaping to space and oxygen reacting with surface rocks. This model is supported by the hydrogen ratio, the deuterium hydrogen ratio on Venus, which is 150 times greater than the DH ratio on Earth. Positive feedbacks do not have to lead to a runaway effect, as the gain is not always sufficient. A strong negative feedback always exists Radiation from a planet increases in proportion to the fourth power of temperature in accordance to the Stefan-Boltzmann law. So the positive feedback effect has to be very strong to cause a runaway effect, an exponential effect of something like that. An increase in temperature from greenhouse gases leading to increased water vapor causing further warming is a positive feedback, but not a runaway effect. So there's a difference between positive feedback and runaway effect. Positive feedback effects are common, but runaway effects do not necessarily emerge from their presence. So on Venus, the runaway greenhouse effect involving carbon dioxide and water vapor may have occurred. In this scenario, early Venus may have had a global ocean. As the brightness of the early sun increased, the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere increased, increasing the temperature and consequently increasing the evaporation of the ocean, leading eventually to the situation in which the oceans boiled. Well, of course, Venus is much closer to the sun, so I'm not sure, obviously that's probably an inevitable thing, right? Earth's climate has swung repeatedly between warm periods and ice ages during its history. In the current climate, the gain of the positive feedback effect from increased atmospheric water vapor is well below that which is required to boil away the oceans, of course. That would require much, much more dramatically high temperatures. Climate scientist John Houghton has written, "There is no possibility of runaway greenhouse conditions occurring on the Earth." However, climatologist James Hansen disagrees. In his Storms of My Grandchildren, he says that burning coal and mining shale oil will result in the runaway greenhouse on Earth. So this is a pretty extreme statement, maybe we need to read James Hansen a little bit more clearly. Benton and Twitchett have a different definition of the runaway greenhouse effect. Events meeting this definition have been suggested as a cause for the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum and the Great Dying, as it's called. It doesn't sound too cheery, does it? So normally when a planet's radiation balance is perturbed, increasing the amount of sunlight it gets or changing the greenhouse concentration, it will transition to a new temperature until a stabilizing feedback known as the Stefan-Boltzmann response restores a new equilibrium between the amount of energy the body absorbs and that which it emits. For example, if the Earth received more sunlight, it would result in a temporary disequilibrium and result in warming. However, because of the Stefan-Boltzmann response mandates that this hotter planet emit more energy, eventually a new radiation balance can be reached and the temperatures will be maintained at its new higher values. So it's the Earth adjusting. It's an adjustment, I guess you could say, but a fairly malicious adjustment. Because eventually, it's kind of like eventually if you've got a tire with a chip in it, eventually that tire is going to be more wobbly, and then it's going to be a worse and worse tire, causing more imbalance with the car, and it's going to get worse and worse. So this is the chip in the tire that the Stefan-Boltzmann response is and this is eventually going to lead to a car crashing, or the Earth crashing in the analogy. So yeah, pretty scary stuff. The concept of a habitable zone has been used by planetary scientists and astrobiologists to define an orbital region around a star in which a planet or moon can sustain liquid water. Under this definition, the inner edge of the habitable zone is determined by the point in which the runaway greenhouse process occurs. For sun-like stars, this inner edge is estimated to reside at roughly 84% of the distance from the Earth to the Sun, although feedback such as cloud-induced albedo increase could modify the estimate somewhat. So there's just some quick analysis of the runaway greenhouse effect, which is something we really, really need to pay attention to. And for those of you on the right who think Al Gore is full of it, he's saying a lot of things we should at least be talking about. That the Earth is a precious planet, and we cannot afford to rape the planet any further for business purposes. We cannot afford it. So those like Lord Monckton, who make fun of liberals who believe in climate change, Lord Monckton, you're on the wrong track.